Today we are talking about bias and privilege, and this was a topic that I figured you need to hear from me before you really dive deep into this topic. Because hopefully, with a little bit more background and understanding of why this is important, maybe it won't sting as much as it could have if you didn't hear from me. Just so you guys know, I also have Miss Went here and Mrs. Biggs because they are both people that I trust a lot when it comes to this topic. They have done a lot of deep diving into their own personal beliefs and now do a great job of helping out our students understand their own interactions with society. So if you hear them interject, don't worry, it's not a weirdo on the street, it's just these teachers that you love. So let's break this down. Okay, want to give you the definition. What is bias? What is privilege? Okay, according to Merriam-Webster, the definition of bias is an inclination of temperament or outlook. Okay, this is a personal and sometimes unreasoned judgment. Now, you may not always know that you have biases, but we'll dive into that. Next up is privilege. This is, by definition, a right or immunity granted as a peculiar benefit, advantage, or favor. Okay, so what does this mean? What are the different types, and how does this impact you? So we're looking at bias first. Okay, typically, your different types of bias are going to be stereotypes, sexism, racism, discrimination, or age. That's not all, but those are going to be your most common ones that, especially as students, you would come across every single day. So thinking about stereotypes, what kind of stereotypes have you made about the students here at this school? Typically with this topic, we think about jocks, nerds, the cool kids, not cool kids, whatever it is.
They call them tryhards in middle school.
Tryhards. Okay, so there's these different stereotypes, and you may have already placed people into these different categories without ever talking to them in the first place. And we shouldn't do that, because then we are assuming that they already have this type of thought process, that they are really good at classes, but maybe they aren't. Maybe they are having their own separate struggles that you don't even know about, that are impacting the way that they are interacting with you and other students. Sexism, okay, that's one that we talk about a lot, especially in history, okay? And this doesn't have to be just based on cisgender stereotypes as well. Okay, cisgender being the gender that you were assigned at birth. There are also different types of sexism bias, especially now as we are expanding our horizons when it comes to the understanding of gender norms and so on. Racism, so being judged based on your race, and that is purely a face value. A lot of these are face values bias that you don't even know what that person sounds like, talks like, their education. You are completely judging a book by its cover. There are types of discrimination, whether that be wealth, class, where someone grew up maybe. And then one that you may not have realized is age. And everyone has probably experienced some kind of age bias at some point in their life. Think about as a high school student, maybe a teacher says, oh, you don't know the answer because you're just a high schooler, or you don't know any better because you're just a high schooler. You could take that as a form of age bias, because just because you're younger doesn't mean you don't know. And that can go the other way around as well, where you are assuming that someone is old and they just have old values. That's also not true, and you're judging them based on their age when you may have never talked to them in the first place. So there's two ways that we see bias. There's explicit bias and implicit bias. Your explicit bias is when you are aware and you are actively continuing to make that kind of decision. It's operating consciously for you every day. Whereas implicit bias is when you most likely are unaware that you have this bias, and it takes some education or maybe someone pointing it out to you in order for you to realize that this was something that you need to unlearn as you go. So the big thing is that it's operating subconsciously, you're unaware of it, but once you find out, it's up to you to become educated and start to unlearn some of those biases. Next, with privilege, just listing off some of the typical different types of privilege that impact our society. We've got education, language, ability, income, sex, race, and age. Okay, so thinking about education privilege, think about people who had maybe the money or the opportunity to go to a university versus someone who right out of the gates isn't able to maybe complete high school or only has a high school diploma. Okay, how could that impact their ability to climb up the ladder employment-wise later on in life? If you had the opportunity to get a master's and someone else didn't, well, the person with the master's is most likely to get hired first. Why did they have the opportunity? Well, that can play into a couple of different privileges, but just know your education level typically is going to be a privilege, and you need to use that. Next, language, which is one we may not think about a lot in the United States because, for the most part, this is our privilege. Our entire world, for the most part, is operating off of the system of the English language. It's the most universal language used when it comes to business and going in tourism, all those different kinds of things. So when you travel, maybe say to Paris, you can guarantee that you'll be able to order a coffee. Whereas someone from Paris coming over here to the United States, they don't know if people will understand their request or what they're asking, because not everyone here speaks French. Okay, so we have that great ability to kind of travel and explore where we need to because we have access to the most common language throughout the world. Ability could be seen in physical or mental ability. Okay, so do you have a step above someone else because you are faster, or you're able to read quicker, or you can write well based on what you've grown up knowing that, versus maybe some of your classmates who don't have that opportunity. Okay, that is also a privilege. Your income, okay, so your grandparents, your parents, what was their income, and then how does that set you apart or give you a step up against some of your classmates or other people throughout society? Now, here in America, we really like to glorify the capitalist ideals of an economy, where if you work hard, you're going to make money and you're going to succeed. Sometimes not true, okay? If your grandparents were billionaires, you don't have to work as hard as someone who came from, say, a slum to get into a billionaire business and have that income to then retire with. Okay, so just starting at different points in our lives, that is also a privilege. Sex, okay, this is a big one. Sorry guys, but unfortunately because you are male, most of the time you're going to have more access to things than your female counterparts. So a story that I always like to share because people think, oh, that's an issue of the past. It's not, okay? My grandma shared the story with me that in the 1970s when she tried to buy a piece of property here around Marshall, she was denied the loan by the bank because her husband or father did not sign on the bank loan. And so she was denied because she was a woman. Okay? So think about that privilege of being a male versus going in as a woman and needing approval to get a loan or to get property. Not that long ago.
An even more recent example is that in recent times in fields like STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and math, women are typically less trusted to be successful than men. So if you were, for instance, calling into an IT center and got a woman, that woman, more often than not, is going to get questioned as to whether she's right versus if that same caller were to get a man. Or if the ticket is being responded to by a woman's name, it's more likely to receive negative feedback or to be questioned than if a man's name is on the ticket. So even in fields that are still predominantly male-dominated, like technology, like science and engineering, we still see a lot of really harmful sexism happening where people are questioning whether or not those females are even certified to do that job when they have equal certifications to their male peers.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Went. Heading on next to race. Okay, this is the one that you're going to hear most of the time, especially in the news today with everything that's been going on. Okay, most of the time when you hear privilege, your mind is automatically going to associate it with white privilege because that's what we hear a lot, especially in social media. And the thing that we need to talk about this with is it's not saying that you're a bad person if you have this extra privilege. It's the fact of just recognizing you haven't had it as hard or you haven't had the barriers to get where you are because of your race or ethnicity. Okay, we'll definitely dive deeper into that in a couple of units. And again, age. Okay, so do you have access to more things because you're younger versus someone who is considered elderly? Do you not have access to things because you're younger? Okay, so think about voting. You have opinions, but because of your age, you are excluded from having that opportunity. Is that considered a form of privilege? Okay, so the big thing with privilege is understanding, do you have it? And now, how can you help others with the privilege that you have?
So one quick thing on privilege, and Ms. Herman kind of alluded to it, is privilege, I think today, in today's society, has this negative connotation to it, and it's not negative in nature. So the big thing to remember with privilege is that you are acknowledging your privilege and doing something about it. It doesn't make you a bad person because you have the privilege of being white or being male or any of those things. So start changing your mindset about privilege being a bad thing because it's not.
Well said. Thank you. So here are some things I want you to think about throughout the week as we get into diving and seeing, do we have any bias and do we have access to different forms of privilege? Okay, so the big thing first is recognition. Do I currently have any bias? Do I currently or in the past have I had privilege? And once you're able to recognize and say, yup, I have that, or yup, I learned that growing up, then you need to unlearn. Okay, so this is where the education piece is really important. You're going to have to go in and see, where was I wrong? What were my misconceptions? Okay, get some of those facts down, because then you're going to put it into action. Okay, once you understand your bias and privilege, it's really important to help spread that knowledge and information from an informed point of view. Okay, so how can I learn from and help others based on my bias and privilege? And hopefully that's what we will able to do, or at least get into starting this week. Now, forewarning, this is a really, really big topic to fit into 4 days. Okay, this is not the end of the journey. And this is a journey. Okay, I, at 25, have been working on this for years. Mrs. Biggs has been working on this for years. Ms. Went has been working on this for years. And it's a constant learning process. And you're constantly evaluating yourself, others, and then helping to inform others and help to further other people based on your privileges. So let me know if you have any questions, but this week definitely considers these 4 different points. See you soon.